So there you have it. Why I think the man in yellow lied to Tabitha. Personally, I believe his warning wasn't a message of protection, but a desperate attempt to slow the residents down before they discovered something that could change everything. Have you ever stopped and wondered what if the most important thing the man in yellow said to Tabitha wasn't the warning itself, but the fact that he chose to say it at all? Think about it. This is a character who has spent years manipulating people, watching them suffer, and allowing horrific events to unfold without ever feeling the need to explain himself. Yet suddenly, after everything that's happened, he appears directly in front of Tabitha and gives her a choice. He tells her that digging up the bones could either bring them closer to saving the children and finding answers, or unleash a suffering beyond anything they can imagine. But what if that wasn't the truth? What if the man in yellow wasn't warning Tabitha at all? What if he was lying? And more importantly, what if he lied because for the very first time in the history of the town, he's genuinely afraid of what's about to happen? The deeper you look at his conversation with Tabitha, the more suspicious it becomes. And when you start connecting it to everything we've seen throughout Season 4, it begins to look less like a warning and more like a desperate attempt to stop the residents from discovering something that could change the game forever. So let's take a closer look. Here is why I think the man in yellow lied to Tabitha. The first thing that jumped out to me during the conversation between Tabitha and the man in yellow wasn't what he said. It was the fact that he said anything at all. Throughout the entire show, the forces controlling the town have never operated this way. Whenever suffering was coming, nobody was warned. When people died, nobody was given a choice. When tragedies unfolded, they happened without explanation. The monsters never appeared and told people what was about to happen. The town never offered guidance. Instead, everything was designed to confuse, manipulate, and punish the residents. That's why the conversation with Tabitha feels so different. For the first time, the man in yellow suddenly becomes incredibly talkative. He explains things. He presents possibilities. He practically hands Tabitha a decision to make. And the more I think about it, the less sense that makes. If the unimaginable suffering he described was genuinely coming, then why tell Tabitha about it? Why risk giving her information? Why risk making her suspicious? The man in yellow has never needed permission from the residents to make them suffer. If disaster was inevitable, he could have simply allowed events to unfold naturally. That's exactly what he's done throughout the entire series. Instead, he specifically appears to Tabitha and tries to influence her thinking before she makes a decision. To me, that suggests that the outcome isn't guaranteed. It suggests that something is about to happen that he cannot fully control. I actually think the warning was designed to create hesitation. The moment Tabitha heard the words, unimaginable suffering, the goal was simple. Make her doubt herself. Make her question whether pursuing the truth is worth the risk. Make her wonder if she should stop before it's too late. Because hesitation is exactly what the man in yellow needs. If the residents start questioning themselves, they slow down. If they slow down, they stop moving forward. And if they stop moving forward, they never reach whatever it is that he's trying to hide. What's interesting is that the man in yellow didn't simply threaten Tabitha. Instead, he mixed hope together with fear. He told her that she might find answers. He told her that she could potentially save the children. But then he immediately followed it with the possibility of unimaginable suffering. That combination feels incredibly deliberate. It's almost like he wanted her trapped between two emotions at the same time. Hope pushes her forward. Fear pulls her back. And when somebody is caught between hope and fear, they become easier to manipulate. The more I think about it, the more this conversation reminds me of something we've seen repeatedly throughout the show. The town rarely stops people through force alone. Instead, it attacks their minds. It creates doubt. It creates confusion. It creates fear. We've watched characters second-guess themselves countless times. We've seen visions, voices, and manipulations designed specifically to influence decisions. So when the man in yellow suddenly appears and starts talking about catastrophic consequences, I don't think he's revealing the truth. I think he's continuing the same strategy we've seen for 4 seasons. There's also another detail that feels incredibly important. The man in yellow admitted that Tabitha and the others were doing something they've never done before. That's a huge statement. If he's telling the truth there, then it means the residents have reached a point that previous cycles never reached. And if they've reached a point that has never existed before, then the man in yellow is stepping into unknown territory. Suddenly, he's no longer dealing with a story that always ends the same way. Suddenly, there are variables he hasn't encountered before. That changes everything, because fear doesn't come from certainty. Fear comes from uncertainty. If the man in yellow knew exactly what would happen next, then there would be no reason for him to intervene. But if he doesn't know what happens after the bones are discovered, if he doesn't know what happens when the residents reach this stage, then his behavior starts to make much more sense. He isn't warning Tabitha because he cares about her. He's warning Tabitha because he's worried about what comes next, and that brings us to what might be the biggest question of all. If the man in yellow was lying, then what exactly is he trying so desperately to protect? Because I don't think the answer is the children. I don't think it's the monsters. And I don't even think it's the town itself. I think it's something far bigger than that. Something hidden at the very center of everything. Something that could finally explain why this nightmare has continued for so long. And if that's true, then the residents may be closer to the truth than they've ever been before. The more I've thought about the man in yellow's warning, the more I've started to believe that the bones themselves might not be the dangerous part of the equation. In fact, I think the real danger could be what those bones represent. Throughout Season 4, we've seen multiple clues pointing toward the idea that the town's entire existence is built upon something that happened a very long time ago. The sacrificed children, the repeating cycles, the reincarnations of Jade and Tabitha, and the strange connections between different generations all seem to lead back to one central event. An event that the town desperately wants to keep buried. And that's exactly why the bones matter. Not because they're physically dangerous, but because they could contain the truth. When you really think about it, every major mystery in the show eventually circles back to the children. The boy in white keeps appearing. The visions keep leading people toward them. Jade and Tabitha continue discovering pieces of information connected to them. Even the symbols seem tied to the sacrifices that took place long ago. It's almost as if the entire town was created around that moment. So if the bones belong to those who were sacrificed, then uncovering them might do something the town has spent centuries preventing. It might expose the original lie, and if that's the case, then suddenly the man in yellow's behavior starts looking incredibly suspicious. One thing that stood out to me was the fact that he specifically mentioned bringing the children home. That's a very strange phrase to use. Throughout the show, we've heard characters talk about escaping, surviving, and finding answers. But the man in yellow specifically focused on the children. It's almost like he knows that whatever happens next revolves around them. Yet at the same time, he's trying to make the residents afraid of continuing their search. That contradiction feels important, because if freeing the children is genuinely possible, then why discourage it? If the children are innocent victims, why stand in the way? The only answer that makes sense to me is that freeing them would create consequences for the man in yellow himself. I've always believed that the man in yellow knows far more than he admits. Every time he appears, he seems completely aware of events taking place inside the town. He understands people's histories. He understands their choices. He understands things that nobody else should know. Yet despite all of that knowledge, there are moments where he appears surprisingly cautious. And those moments are becoming more frequent as the season progresses. We saw it when Boyd began fighting. We saw it when the monsters started encountering resistance. We saw it when people stopped blindly accepting their situation, and now we're seeing it again with the bones. It's almost as if every step toward the truth is making the man in yellow increasingly uncomfortable. Another thing that I find interesting is the way he framed the entire situation. Notice how he never actually said what the suffering would be. He kept it vague. He used broad language. He talked about unimaginable consequences but never explained what those consequences were. That's a classic manipulation tactic. The human mind naturally fills in the blanks with its worst fears. By refusing to provide specifics, he allows Tabitha to imagine endless possibilities, and that's far more effective than any direct threat, because a known danger can be prepared for and all. Unknown danger becomes terrifying. The more I think about it, the more it feels like the man in yellow wanted Tabitha focusing on the potential consequences instead of asking questions about why he was so concerned in the first place. Imagine if Tabitha had responded differently. Imagine if she had simply asked him one question. Why? Are you trying so hard to stop us? I don't think he would have had a good answer, because everything about his behavior suggests that he's acting defensively. What's even more fascinating is that the timing of this warning couldn't be more suspicious. He doesn't appear when the residents are confused. He doesn't appear when they have no leads. He doesn't appear when they're wandering aimlessly through the mystery. Instead, he shows up at the exact moment they're making genuine progress. That's not a coincidence. If somebody only starts interfering when you're getting closer to the truth, then that truth is probably something they don't want. Discovered. And that's where I think the biggest lie comes into play. I don't think the man in yellow was lying about suffering entirely. I think suffering is coming. I think terrible things are absolutely going to happen. But I don't think those things are connected to the residents digging up the bones. I think they're connected to the man in yellow realizing that he's losing control. Those are two completely different things. For years, the town has operated according to a predictable pattern. People arrive. People suffer. People die. The cycle continues. Every generation experiences its own version of the same nightmare. But now something feels different. Characters are making discoveries that previous generations never made. Connections are being formed that shouldn't exist. Pieces of the puzzle are coming together, and the man in yellow knows it. That's why I think the suffering he's talking about may actually be his response to what's coming. Think about it. If somebody was about to expose everything you've spent centuries protecting, wouldn't you fight back? Wouldn't you become more aggressive? Wouldn't you become more desperate? The more desperate the man in yellow becomes, the more dangerous he becomes, and that could explain why the final episodes feel like they're building toward something massive, not because the residents are making a mistake, but because they're finally making the right move. The greatest trick the man in yellow may have ever pulled isn't convincing people to fear the monsters. It isn't convincing them to fear the town. It's convincing them to fear the truth itself. And if Tabitha realizes that, then his entire plan could start falling apart. Because once people stop fearing the truth, they become incredibly difficult to control. And for the first time since we've known him, the man in yellow might be facing a situation where his words are no longer enough to manipulate the outcome, which raises an even darker possibility. What happens when manipulation stops working? What happens when lies stop working? What happens when the man in yellow is forced to reveal what he's truly capable of? Because I have a feeling that the answer to those questions is exactly what we're about to discover. After looking at everything that happened, I keep coming back to one conclusion. The man in yellow didn't lie to Tabitha because he wanted to trick her into making a bad decision. He lied because the truth would have been far more dangerous for him. When villains feel confident, they don't explain themselves, they don't negotiate, they don't issue warnings, they simply act. That's why this conversation feels so important. For 4 seasons, the man in yellow has operated from the shadows. He has watched events unfold without feeling the need to step in personally. Even when people died, even when plans failed, and even when residents started uncovering pieces of the mystery, he remained distant. But suddenly, as the residents move closer to discovering the bones and uncovering answers connected to the children, he appears himself. Not a monster, not a vision, not a message. Him, and that alone tells us something has changed. Personally, I think the biggest clue is hidden inside one simple detail. The man in yellow admitted that Jade and Tabitha had reached a point they've never reached before. The more I think about that statement, the more significant it becomes. Because if countless cycles have happened before, and if previous versions of Jade and Tabitha failed every single time, then reaching new territory means the story is no longer following the path that the man in yellow expects. That's a problem for him, because control only exists when outcomes are predictable. The moment people start doing things that have never happened before, control begins to disappear, and that's exactly what we seem to be witnessing. Think the reason the man in yellow appeared in front of Tabitha was because he needed to influence the outcome before events moved beyond his control. He couldn't physically stop her. He couldn't force her to abandon the search. So instead, he used the one thing he's always relied on: fear. The entire town operates on fear. The monsters feed on fear. The visions create fear. The voices create fear. The uncertainty creates fear. Fear is the foundation of everything. So naturally, when the man in yellow found himself facing something unexpected, he responded with the same strategy he's always used. But what if it doesn't work this time? What if Boyd, Jade, Tabitha, and the others decide to move forward anyway? That's where things become really interesting. Because if the residents continue searching despite the warning, then we'll finally discover whether the man in yellow was protecting them from danger or protecting himself from exposure. Personally, I think it's the second option, and there's another reason why. Throughout the season, we've seen multiple signs that the town itself is becoming unstable. Characters are remembering things they shouldn't remember. Connections between past and present are becoming stronger. More secrets are being revealed than ever before. It's almost as if the barriers that have hidden the truth for so long are beginning to crack. The man in yellow can probably see that happening. He can probably feel it. And if that's true, then his warning to Tabitha suddenly takes on a completely different meaning. What if the suffering he described isn't a future event? What if it's something that's already started? Think about it. The town has never seemed more chaotic. The monsters have never seemed more unpredictable. The visions have become more intense. The mysteries are becoming harder to contain. Maybe the suffering isn't waiting around the corner. Maybe it's the result of the system breaking apart. And if the system is breaking apart, then the person